Welcome to CIS 101, or really, welcome back to CIS 101 for just about everybody. Last class, we talked a little bit about assessing your computer systems, evaluating your key subsystems, what would be your ideal computing device. We talked a little bit about evaluating your CPU, your central processing unit subsystem. We talked a little bit about evaluating your memory subsystem. And we talked a little bit about evaluating your storage subsystem in terms of what you want and what you need. Not necessarily what you think you want, but what you want, and then what you need, and that goes into what you can afford. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 7, which is connecting computing devices. Okay? We're going to talk a little bit about how networks function, the networking fundamentals, the network architectures, the network components, connecting to the internet, all right? And the reason you want to know this stuff, for many of you, some of you will want to know it just because it's really neat stuff to know. I mean, one of the reasons that I have way too many computers at the house is that I like working on computers. I like taking older models and tweaking them up so they can continue to compete with the latest models. And in some cases, in my opinion, the older models, the Lenovo series, the T60s and T61s with the 4:3 screen, which is much higher, narrower but much higher, I think is a more effective programming tool, more effective tool for anything except for like browsing and watching YouTube videos and video presentations. Bear in mind that if you look at this slide, according to the salary information from Glassdoor for the River Oaks area in Chicago, the average base pay for a network support engineer, okay, with an associate's degree is about $73,000. This isn't bad. If you remember, we talked about last year, the average household income, of a family was about $60,000. The average salary of a network engineer in the Chicago area is $73,000, and that means that a bunch of them are making more than $73,000, and some of them, the entry-level ones, are making as low as the mid-50s while they get their foot in the door and work their way up. Another way to look at it in terms of not just salary, but in terms of job opportunity, because the IT unemployment rate is extremely low. It practically doesn't exist. It's 2.2%. The salaries, as we saw from the previous slide, are above average. And there are a number of certifications that are available from a variety of different organizations that you can use to add to a potential for any prospective employer. You can put these in your resume if you've earned them to make you a more desirable candidate. This has worked for me in virtually every job I've ever gone and looked at. And while the unemployment rate for IT is under 2.2%, and we'll revisit this in a later class, the unemployment rate for cybersecurity is like 0%. It's just unbelievably low, which is actually bad in a way, because companies are hiring people who they really shouldn't necessarily hire, but the bottom of the barrel is so bare that they're literally taking people and they're hoping that they're going to work out, because they're thinking somebody who says they can do it is better than nobody, which obviously can't do it. Things we're going to talk about today include talking about what a network is and the pros and cons of having one, how networks are defined by distance, how networks are classified by the levels of administration, the Ethernet protocols or Ethernet protocols, you can have it either way, for wired and wireless networks, and the types of transmission media used in networks. We're also going to talk about the basic devices that are necessary for networks, and this builds on what we talked about in terms of what's necessary for an individual computer system, the types of software necessary for networks. We're going to compare and contrast the broadband options available to access the internet. We're going to compare and contrast the broadband options available to access the internet. And we're going to talk about how we access the internet wirelessly. And we're going to summarize the pros and cons of dial-up connections, which are still out there and used by a lot of people, especially in the more rural areas away from the major cities. When we talk about networking fundamentals, we're talking about understanding the building blocks of a computer. And the basic building block starts with a node. It's going to be a computer device of some type, a phone, computer, could be a peripheral such as your print device, your printer, which is what we normally, most people just call a print device a printer, but really a printer is technically is going to be a print device. Or it could be your microwave or your refrigerator, your garage door opener, your doorbell if you have one of the newer doorbells that have wirelessly connected or connected to your network and include a camera in them, or any other type of network device. Okay, and at the computer level, all these devices are going to be tracked and put into various categories. Either the shared computers will be in one, and anything else will be considered to be some other type of a peripheral device. Notice that the print devices and the routers are all considered to be a network media or others. They are not considered to be a computer as such. Although arguably, many print devices are for all intents and purposes a specialized type of computer, and routers are for all intents and purposes a specialized type of computer as well. But they have specific role, and within your networking software, they're going to be categorized as such. And the reason that companies spend hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars on the hardware, on the software, and on the salaries, okay, for the networks, is because there are benefits that come with that, especially if you have a high-speed internet connection, the ability to connect your printers and peripheral devices. I remember, in my mind, not too long ago, when there was a time, 20 years ago, I remember going in and doing network audits for places where they would have a printer on every desk. There wouldn't be one for the room, one for the department. Every device would have a dedicated printer, okay, or print device. Talks a little bit about the ability to share and access files without having to do what we used to call sneakernet, where people would literally copy a file onto a floppy disk, okay, before we had USBs, and then they would hand carry that floppy disk over to another person. Say, here's my floppy disk. There was no network to access them on, and of course, common communications. And we'll talk more about that later. But it's not just the ability to use various aspects of a communications network to send emails, to send text, okay, but also phone calls, telemeetings, remote working, like we're doing a little bit of that today. Okay, we classify our networks in terms of distance, in terms of management, in terms of the rules that they use to exchange data, and in terms of the communication medium that is used to connect the devices together. They also can be classified by the type of network, whether it is a 600-pound gorilla, the client-server network, which is a little bit more efficient because you have specialized roles and specialized configurations for the various devices, or it can be the less common but easier to set up, as long as you're talking about 10 or less computers. That's a rule of thumb for what we call peer-to-peer networks. They work well, or they can work well, for groups of computers of 10 or less, more than 10, and you really want to start sliding into a client-server network configuration. Okay. In terms of transmission media, okay, they are generally going to be connected by a router or a switch, either wirelessly through the radio waves, or by what we call hardwired communications, category 5, category 6, or some other, or possibly even an older network, category 3 wires are going to go from device to device. On the hardware side of things, which is more secure, more reliable, and faster, okay, you have some various types of wired categories. You have your 600-pound gorilla, which is twisted pair. You have also very widespread, but not as common, coaxial. If you think about your cable TV, that tends to they tend to utilize coaxial cable for their network communications, and your streaming video and all the other things you get on your TV are essentially a type of network. And on the high end, very fast, very secure, but a little bit more expensive to install and then troubleshoot if needed, are your fiber optic. Fiber optic are usually large companies, the government, which likes to spend other people's money. They're especially and I've never liked this, but it's a fact of life. Depending on the end of the fiscal year, usually the last quarter of a fiscal year, you'll find the governmental departments at any level, okay, are trying to spend any money they have left in their accounts, because what you don't want to do in the government is basically have money left over in your account. You and I would look at that as, well, that's thrifty, that's great. You managed to save money, you didn't spend all you had, kudos to you. At any level of government, they tend to look at that in terms of, well, if you didn't spend all your money, then obviously you wouldn't need all your money, so we can give you less money in your budget next year, and see if that doesn't work out. We'll give the money you didn't spend, we'll allocate it to some other department who maybe does need that money, because you evidently didn't. I mean, I remember, case in point, for example, in the Army, the last quarter of the year, the battalion commanders would go out and they would spend any unallocated funds on things like diesel fuel that they would put in underground tanks. And they knew, and basically diesel fuel, especially in Louisiana, for example, after so many months, it gets contaminated, and you have to basically contract somebody to go in and clean out the contaminants so you can use it. But they would do that just to spend the money, knowing they'd have to go back in and clean it later, rather than have that money, left unused in their account and maybe not get as much the next year. Transmission media types will either be of the Cat 5 series, normally Cat E, but you might, Cat, for a lot of organizations, a regular Cat 5 will work too, or Cat 6 or Cat 6A, okay? They all work very well. The later ones are going to be a little more efficient, a little more secure, a little more reliable, but they're all reliable, they're all secure, okay? All devices of every type that communicates on a network, including our phones, including our microwaves, including our doorbells, is going to have some sort of a network interface card or a network adapter. You're also going to have in any network some sort of broadband modem, and they're basically going to be using packets, little groups of data like trucks or cars on the road, okay? And those trucks and cars on the road, those packets of data, are going to be managed and directed, just like traffic lights, okay, on a road network, by the routers and the switches. Routers are generally more expensive, more intelligent, more capable than a switch, okay, but they are both going to be used. Switches tend to be a little bit faster because they are less capable and they have fewer functions they can do, so it's easier for them to basically choose between, okay, we can only choose between this and that, so it's, it makes it faster for us to make a decision. In terms of operating software or really network software for a network, okay, it's either going to be peer-to-peer, which is generally built into the operating system we're using already, or it could be more specialized network that's going to communicate through a centralized server or servers, and we consider that to be your specialized network operating system software. Here at Triton College, for example, we use an older network operating system software, Novell, and we use it for a couple of reasons. Just like, my cars are all older used cars. They're all paid for. And if you have a network just like a car, if it's doing everything it needs to do, getting you from point A to point B, and it's working fine, you may not see a reason to change. I have never yet had anybody come in and talk to me and say, I was driving down the road and I saw the sign for Triton College and I looked at the buildings and I noticed you're running Novell Network and I was going to enroll here, but I'm not going to enroll here because you're still using Novell. Nobody looks or sees. I mean, we can print fine, we can send files fine, everything works fine. It's essentially invisible and it gets the job done and it's all paid for, and there's something to be said for that. Network types also can be of a home network where you share an internet connection. A lot of us, in fact, do this at home. Don't have to, but many of us do. And in that case, you have to purchase your internet access from an internet service provider. Usually, it comes from our telephone provider. Our telephone/TV provider doesn't have to. There's a lot of overlap there. I mean, you can actually just get your telephone service from one company or no company. You may not have a hardwired. What we call a landline phone, and then you can get your internet access from an internet service provider, either hardwired or say through the Dish network, which has advantages or disadvantages. You also want to think about, do you want broadband, which is generally going to be faster? Can you use cellular or dial-up? And in fact, or you may have a mix of those. In fact, in my car, our internet service provider is my phone. I will turn it on its hotspot capability, and my kids can use it for their internet connection until they use up the entire allocation, which they usually do in just a couple of days, because they're kids. They're 12, they're 14. And the minute you give them access to broadband of any type, they don't really make distinctions about it. And they will burn up, they'll watch their movies and play their games until it's all gone, and they're surprised, well, hey, there's no more internet. Okay. Broadband further can be subdivided into a number of different available types. Cable internet, DSL, which is basically digital subscriber line, handled by the phone company. Fiber can be normally handled by the phone company, but it doesn't have to. Fiber optic service, again, very fast, very secure, but very expensive. Some sort of satellite broadband, just like satellite TV, you can have satellite broadband, or mobile broadband, which will, case in point, your phone, turning your phone into a hotspot for local, usually temporary use. Doesn't have to be, but it gets expensive after a while. Mobile broadband can be further subdivided into some more different categories. Wireless internet at home, a Wi-Fi hotspot of some type, like they would have at a restaurant or a fast food place or a coffee place. Wireless in-flight internet, mobile broadband, 3G, 4G, and we're now starting to get into 5G. And then and for many people, the point is being made, well, 5G is really nice, but for the vast, and if you're using high definition screens and you're watching a lot of streaming video, that can be nice, but really, for a lot of people, 3G or 4G really seems to be all they need. Just like, I'm not saying this for everybody, but I like to buy older computers, what I call ThinkPads, and turn them into what we call Frankenpads by tweaking them. Making them, as in my opinion, competitive with the latest computers, and while they may not be strictly competitive, they are more than 16 gigabyte older ThinkPad. For all intents and purposes, for all my intents and purposes, for me, is just as good as a newer computer, and I have the personal joy of having, basically done it myself, if you will, to a certain extent. We talk a little bit about home networks, how to install and configure a home network, and how to manage and secure that wireless network. Things we'll talk about in this include the steps we would take before creating a home network, the things we need in order to connect devices to a home network, the specialized devices you can add to a home network, summarizing how to configure home network software, the potential problems with wireless networks and how to avoid them, and how to secure a wireless home network. Okay, you need to sit down and think about, before you start, all the devices you are using and what the standards they are using are going to be. It's a little bit like you want high definition TV, and you have a high definition TV. Okay, that's fine. But if the video signal for that high definition TV is not high definition, it's not going to do you any good. Or if you go out and pay for a high definition TV package, but your TV is not capable of showing high definition TV, you're not going to get what you want with the equipment you have. You have to think about what you want, what you need, and then what your equipment will support. Okay, all across the board. What standards are going to work for you, and then what equipment that you want. Do you want the newest equipment, or looking at your needs now and project out a little bit in the future? Can you get by with something that is not necessarily cutting edge? Will that work for you, or will it not work for you? Case in point, a lot of businesses are dragging their feet on shifting to a online Windows 3 or Office 365 configuration. They really don't necessarily want to do that. It's the latest and the greatest, and the companies like Microsoft really would like them to shift to it, but they don't want to. If you are a company, if you're an organization, and for any reason you have an internet outage for whatever reason, and you're using Windows 216 or 219 installed on your local systems, you can keep working. If you're using Windows or Office 365 and you lose your internet connection, you've lost all your capability to get any work because you depended on the internet for all your systems to be able to use it. And companies, a little, not necessarily wrongly, are a little bit jumpy about putting all their eggs in that particular basket. I personally, even though I have an Office 365 account, I also have Windows on all my computers, so I can just work on stuff whether or not I have an internet connection. I don't know, especially when my kids are doing their schoolwork and stuff, or in their Zoom meeting classes with their teachers, I don't necessarily want to get on the internet because that is based on adding to the load of our road out in front of our house, if you will, our internet connection. Every time I'm on it, I'm competing with them, and I may not want to do that because it may slow down their connection. It may cause problems they don't need. You also want to think about whether your network is going to require any routers or switches. Switches are generally less expensive than routers. Routers are more capable. And, you think about routers and switches just like traffic lights. If you've ever been on North Avenue, when the traffic lights were just all blinking red or just flat out, and then everybody switches to the emergency mode where everybody comes to a complete stop at the non-working light and it goes on. If you notice how it really, really slows down the traffic movement versus when the lights are working, especially if they're working the way you want them to, and traffic flows pretty neatly. Routers and switches are really important, which is why people who know how to manage routers and switches, and we have those classes here, can very easily make six figures. You also want to think about, now, do you need some type of storage, specific storage? I don't. I simply have enough computers at the house that every Sunday I copy all the files to all of them because unless there's an asteroid hits the house, I'm going to basically have all my files available to me. Also want to think about your operating system. Assuming we can assume it's going to be Windows. Doesn't have to be. There's some other very good network operating systems out there. But for most of us, the 600-pound gorilla in the personal world and the business world tends to be Windows. And, and if it is Windows, you're going to want to sit down and think about what you want to do, what's important to you, how you're going to set it up, is sharing files important to you, how that's going to happen, is allowing mobile devices to connect to your network important, how that's going to happen. You need to think about the range. Are you going to need how fast you want it to be, and are you going to need range extenders? For example, the average range of Star networking using Cat5, Cat6 cables about 100 meters. So are you going to need range extenders? Essentially devices that attach your network and they basically take the signal and clean it up and retransmit it out so it's good for another 100 meters. This campus, it's more than 100 meters from this building or from the CIS building to the administration building. So the network has a couple of range extenders en route so that the signal can be cleaned up and then retransmitted out and reach the administration building with no degradation of signal quality. Other things you can think about are using techniques, if desired, like piggybacking off available networks. And those of you who go on and take a wireless class will know, or you will notice very quickly there are a lot of wireless networks in the area or at home. If you do a search for wireless networks, you may find that quite a few wireless networks available. Some of them aren't yours, but hey, if they're not secure and you can piggyback on them, that can work. One of the things I occasionally do when I'm trying to make a point to my kids, I want them to like go to bed or it's the middle of the night and I wake up and they're still on on the internet. I'll shut off the internet, and then if I need to use for anything, I will basically boot up and I will basically piggyback off one of my neighbor's Wi-Fi that's unsecured. I've already talked to him. He knows it's me, and I've asked if it's okay. I don't have to, but I feel better doing that. It's more correct that way. And that way I can have internet while they don't have internet. I can get my work done and they are basically, forced into a non-internet mode, which they may not appreciate, but they need their sleep or they can't spend all their time on the internet or whatever. It's not good for them. You also want to think about things like your service set identifier, the SSID for your network. Are you going to have one? What is it going to be? Do you want it to be easily distinguishable or not easily distinguishable? I've known some people that did not want people piggybacking off their Wi-Fi, but they wanted to make it very easy for, they didn't want to make it more cumbersome by putting in a username or password. They allowed to guess and stuff like that. So they named it things like FBI Surveillance Fan 21, with the expectation that the vast majority of people who see that are like, no, they're not going to go anywhere near that. Okay. Or you may make it something easily distinguishable like guest for McDonald's, or your guest for your house, whatever. Or you may want to make it really cryptic and hard to figure out, just counting on people not knowing what it is. Are you going to have a default password? Are you going to change that default password? And there are pluses and minuses for that both ways. What security protocols are you going to use, if any? One of the things I actually do, I have a spare older Wi-Fi extension. And when we have guests over, I will basically plug it in and turn it on. And it basically has an unsecure Wi-Fi so that they can continue to do whatever they're going to do. And then when people leave, I basically, turn it off because all our other Wi-Fi access points are secure. They don't need to know our username and password. It's a pain in the ass for them, and I don't want them knowing it because I don't, they may never need it again. And I just don't want it to be general knowledge. And you want to think about firmware upgrades, just like anything else. Phones are a good example. But all your devices are constantly getting upgrades of the software and a hardware type, a firmware type, and you need to dedicate some time every year or so, every 6 months or so, to go in and see, hey, is there an upgrade for this? And if there is, you want to download it and then choose a time that is appropriate for you to install the firmware. And again, a little bit of caution there. You may want to wait till other people have installed and checked it out. Does it work well? Windows in particular, with Windows 10, has been notorious for issuing patches that people installed, and they cause all sorts of problems. So you don't necessarily want to be the first one to do one of these things. When you're setting up your wireless network, you want to put some thought into which security protocols you're going to use, and I suggest you use something. But you want something that's appropriate for your circumstances. What SSD you're going to use, got to be unique, can be incomprehensible, or it can be scary, or it can be very user-friendly and obvious. Up to you. Okay, we have talked a little bit about what a network is and the pros and cons of having one. We've talked a little bit about how networks are defined by distance, how networks are classified by the levels of administration, a little bit about Ethernet protocols, a little bit about the types of transmission media that are used in networks. We have talked a little bit about the basic devices necessary for networks, the type of software that's necessary for networks. The network operating system is distinct from the operating system in your computer, and it can be very distinct depending on your needs and wants and desires. We've talked a little bit about the different options that are available for accessing the Internet. Okay? Talked about how you can access the Internet through a wired hard connection or wirelessly, the pros and cons of dial-up connections, some of the steps you should think about before creating a home network, the devices you're going to need in order to connect devices on a network, some of the specialized devices you can add to a home network, configuring your home network software, some of the potential problems and considerations and how to avoid them, and securing a wireless home network. Okay, extra credit for those who are interested. Either to figure out the basic devices that are necessary for networks or the type of software that's necessary for networks. Write 100 words with a reference link and submit the assignment in assignment 14 for extra credit. Other things you want to think about. Read through chapter 7. Okay, Excel chapters 1, 2, and 3. In a perfect world, you have those in. Not necessarily the case for everybody, but you do need to submit those in the appropriate assignment categories so I can grade them. This week, the 600-pound gorilla in the room, more important than anything else, is the midterm exam. You want to read through all the review questions, plus Okay, the midterm exam review file. Okay, it looks a lot like this, and as you go down to it and you basically put it into view mode, you can go ahead and select the various categories, pick one, look at the question, lower right hand corner, not shown on your screen, click here, it'll give you the answer, okay, and then you can click back, do it over again, and it shows you what you need to know. The questions on that slide are very, very similar to the questions you're going to have on the midterm exam. So, word to the wise, that the midterm exam review file is well worth going through. It can be a big help in getting a good grade on the midterm. Up to you. You can, if you want, this week, not read anything, not review anything, just go in and do the midterm exam, and best of luck to you. It'll be graded and posted fairly quickly, and we'll move on from there. But it is worth 100 points, so it's like it's 1/4 of your grade. It's 1/2 of your exam grade. So it's well worth putting as much time and effort into as you can. It's a 600-pound gorilla run. Next week, we're going to work on Excel Chapter 4, and then the week after that, we're going to work on the Excel Lab quiz. Just like we had the Word Lab quiz, we're going to have an Excel Lab quiz. But, I really want to emphasize that the 600-pound gorilla in all this is the midterm exam. The more time you spend on that, the happier you're going to be. Give it prepare for it, give it your best shot. It's online. It's for you to do by yourself. Okay? Do not use the Internet Explorer browser because it's a little quirky. Use Firefox, use Chrome. Those are the safe ones, and you'll be fine. Okay? Subject to your questions. Okay? Go ahead and review all the things you have to do. I will be available online to answer them. And good luck on the midterm exam.